It is. We've got a lot to cover, from political shakeups to some interesting economic trends.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into it.
We'll be drawing from two main sources, KVF and in.fo, both prominent news outlets in the Faroe Islands.
Great sources.
So let's jump right in. February was a bit of a roller coaster in Faroe's politics, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. The month started off with a bang with that controversial bill proposed by Janice Avrana.
Right, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Culture.
Exactly. He's known for his conservative views.
And this bill, it aimed to amend the Marriage Act.
The goal was to prevent same-sex female couples from adopting.
It definitely sparked a lot of debate.
To put it mildly, there were massive protests in Torcham in the capital.
Really?
Oh, yeah. People were not happy about it.
So what happened?
Well, ultimately, Avrana withdrew the bill.
That's good, I guess.
But it didn't really end there.
What do you mean?
Well, Prime Minister Axel V. Johannesson decided not to dismiss Avrana from his position.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So even though the bill was withdrawn, the controversy continued.
Exactly. It really fueled the fire. And it brought up some really important questions about LGBTQ plus rights and the role of religion in politics.
Issues that resonate far beyond the Faroe Islands, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
a global conversation. And it's fascinating to see how these issues are playing out in a place like the Faroe Islands.
So how do you think this whole situation reflects on the Faroe Islands on the global stage?
Well, on one hand, it shows that the Faroe Islands is grappling with these complex social issues, just like many other countries.
Right.
On the other hand, you could argue that it makes the Faroe Islands appear less progressive on LGBTQ plus rights compared to some of its Nordic neighbors.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers.
Exactly. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Now, beyond the Avrana controversy, February saw a number of other notable political developments, didn't it?
It did. We had the Prime Minister weighing in on abortion in his new book, which always sparks debate.
Always a sensitive topic.
And then there was a brand new party entering the race for the upcoming municipal elections.
Oh, really?
Yeah, adding another layer of complexity to the political scene.
It sounds like things are heating up.
They are. And then we had the Union Party holding their national meeting strategizing for the future.
Always interesting to see how the parties are positioning themselves.
And last but not least, the People's Party proposed some changes to the pension system.
For February was a busy month for Faroe's politics.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But amidst all the political drama, the economy also threw us a bit of a curveball.
Oh, yeah. What happened there?
Bakkafrost, the major player in salmon farming in the Faroe Islands, acquired yet another Icelandic aquaculture company.
Wow. So they're really expanding.
They are. But here's the thing. Unemployment in the Faroe Islands actually went up.
Really? I would have thought that a major industry like salmon farming would create more jobs.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it raises some important questions about the structure of the Faroes' economy.
Like what?
Well, is the economy too reliant on a single industry?
That's a good point. What happens if that industry takes a hit?
Exactly. Something to consider.
Huh.
And then there's the issue of skills gaps in the workforce. Are there enough people with the right skills to fill the available jobs?
That's something we see in many countries these days.
It is, so it's definitely something to watch in the Faroe Islands.
What else was happening on the economic front in February?
Well, we saw decreasing price growth overall, which could be a sign of a slowing economy.
Not good.
And the Faroes Economic Council released their analysis, which pointed to some underlying vulnerabilities.
Like what?
Well, they emphasized the need for economic diversification. They're saying that relying so heavily on one sector, like aquaculture, makes the economy vulnerable to external shocks.
Makes sense.
They also talked about the challenges of attracting and retaining skilled labor in a remote location like the Faroe Islands.
That's understandable. It's not always easy to convince people to move to a remote island.
No, it's not. But they are working on it.
So it sounds like there's some challenges ahead for the Faroes economy.
There are, but there are also opportunities.
That's a good way to look at it.
And hey, at least there was some good news on the sports front, right?
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Haller Hansen decided to stay with the Key Football Club.
That's great news for Faroes football fans.
It is, and it speaks to that sense of national pride that is so strong in the Faroe Islands.
Speaking of national pride, let's talk about culture. What were some of the highlights from February?
Well, a new Faroes film premiered, generating buzz both locally and internationally.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
It is. And a Faroes music album received international acclaim as well.
So the Faroe Islands is making its mark on the global cultural scene.
It certainly is. And it makes you wonder, what is it about Faroes art and music that's resonating with audiences worldwide?
That's a great question. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a certain rawness and authenticity to Faroe's art that appeals to people. It's something different, something unique.
Like a breath of fresh air.
Exactly. And I think people are drawn to that.
So we've covered the major political and economic developments, the exciting news from the world of sports and culture. But what about those smaller stories? The ones that give us a glimpse into everyday life in the Faroe Islands?
Those are important too, aren't they?
Absolutely. They help us understand what it's really like to live in this fascinating place.
So in February, we saw the signing of a new healthcare agreement with Denmark.
Interesting. What's that all about?
It focuses on specialized treatments and patient transfers between the Faroe Islands and Denmark.
So it's ensuring that Faroe citizens have access to the best possible care.
Exactly. But it also sparked a debate about the long-term sustainability of the Faroes' healthcare system.
So there are concerns about costs and resources.
There are. It's a challenge for many countries these days.
It is. And then we had a new study released on smoking habits in the Faroe Islands.
Sadly, it revealed some worrying trends among younger demographics.
That's concerning.
It is. It highlights the need for more effective public health campaigns targeting young people.
And then there was some good news on the environmental front.
Oh, yeah. Tórshavn, the capital city, launched a new initiative to reduce their carbon footprint.
That's fantastic. What are they doing?
They're promoting green energy, improving public transportation, encouraging eco-friendly practices among residents.
It sounds like a comprehensive plan.
It is.
Right.
And it generated a lot of discussion, which is always a good sign.
It shows that people are engaged and thinking about these important issues.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our look at February, we see this interesting theme emerging. The Faroe Islands navigating its place in a rapidly changing world.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on February? What struck you the most?
Well, I'm fascinated by the political landscape and how those social issues are playing out. I'm also curious to see how the Faroe Islands will address those economic challenges.
And how about you? What resonated with you?
Well, I'm always drawn to those cultural stories.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing how the Faroe Islands is making its mark on the global stage.
It is inspiring.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think we can learn a lot from this small but vibrant nation.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned as we dive into March next. We'll see how these stories continue to unfold. March was an interesting month. Picking up where we left off in February, a lot of those same themes continue to develop.
Yeah. It sounds like things were still pretty lively on the political front.
Oh, absolutely. The ripples from the Averana controversy were still being felt.
Even though he withdrew that bill about same-sex adoption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems like it really opened up a broader conversation about LGBTQ plus rights and the role of religion in society.
It's like it pushed a button and got people really talking about these issues.
Yeah, and not always in a calm and rational way either.
So things got a little heated.
Oh, in some cases, very heated.
Yeah.
You know, lots of strongly worded opinion pieces, public forums, debating back and forth.
So that sense of polarization we talked about.
It was definitely present. And it's not just a Faroes thing either, right? We see this kind of division in so many countries these days.
It's like everyone's retreating to their own corners and it's getting harder to find common ground.
Yeah, it's a worrying trend. And it was definitely noticeable in the build-up to the municipal elections.
Oh, right. Those were coming up in March, weren't they?
Yeah, and remember that new political party that emerged in February?
One positioning themselves as the more progressive alternative.
Exactly. Well, they really shook things up.
How so?
They seemed to energize a lot of younger voters. Those who felt like the established parties weren't really representing them.
So they brought a fresh perspective.
They did. And it'll be interesting to see how they do in the elections and what kind of impact they have on Faroe's politics in the long run.
I'm curious, too. It's like a new generation stepping onto the political stage.
It is. And that always brings a sense of excitement and unpredictability.
Speaking of unpredictability, the international scene also saw some action in March, didn't it?
It did. The Faroes government was busy trying to strengthen ties with other nations, particularly in the areas of trade and fisheries.
Always crucial for the Faroe Islands.
Absolutely. There were those high-level meetings with representatives from the UK and the EU. Lots of talk about trade agreements and fishing quotas.
So it was a month of diplomacy.
It was, and it really highlights the balancing act that the Faroe Islands has to maintain, right?
Maybe.
Well, they want to protect their own economic interests, of course.
Makes sense.
But they also need to cooperate with international partners and adhere to those global regulations.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is, and it requires a lot of skill and careful negotiation.
Okay, so we've got those political tensions simmering away and the Faroe Islands maneuvering on the international stage. What was happening with the economy in March? Any more surprises there?
Well, remember that rise in unemployment we saw in February?
Yeah, I still can't get over that.
It was a bit of a head-scratcher, wasn't it?
It was,
If
especially with Bakkafrost expanding and all.
Yeah, so in March, the Faroes Economic Council released their big report on the state of the economy. And they shed some light on what might be going on.
So what was their take on it?
Well, they pointed to a number of factors.
Like what?
Well, a slowdown in some key industries, like construction and tourism.
So it wasn't just about salmon farming.
Not at all. It was more complex
Uh-huh.
than that. And then there's that ongoing issue of attracting and retaining skilled labor.
Right, a challenge for a lot of remote places.
It is, and it's something the Faroe Islands is really trying to tackle.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
But it sounds like they're thinking long term,
They are. The report emphasized the need for diversification of the economy.
not putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Actually, they're talking about investing in new areas of growth, like renewable energy and technology.
So building a more resilient and sustainable economic model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's smart thinking, isn't it?
So even though there are challenges, they're approaching them strategically.
They are, which
Yeah.
is encouraging. And speaking of strategic moves, remember Bakkafrost?
The salmon farming giants.
Yes, well, they were in the news again in March.
What were they up to?
They announced plans to invest heavily in new sustainable farming technology.
Interesting. So they're not just focusing on expansion.
No, they're also looking at ways to reduce their environmental impact.
It's like they're acknowledging that consumer demand for sustainable products.
Exactly. And it's a smart business move, too, being seen as an environmentally responsible company.
It makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so we've covered politics and economics. What about culture? Did the Faroe Islands continue to make waves on the international scene in March?
Oh, absolutely. There was a Faroes documentary film that premiered at a big international film festival.
Wow. Did it get good reviews?
Really good reviews. Critics were praising the cinematography, the storytelling.
What was it about?
Well, many of the critics said it captured the beauty of the Faroes landscape really well.
And the resilience of the people who live there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, there's something about that connection to nature that seems to resonate with people.
Especially these days when so many of us are feeling disconnected from the natural world.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And it wasn't just film. A Faroes musician was also nominated for a prestigious international music award.
Wow. So the Faroe Islands is really making a name for itself in the world of arts and culture.
It is. And it's fascinating to see, isn't it?
It is. What do you think it is about Faroe's music that's connecting with people?
Well, a lot of reviewers talked about the haunting melodies and the unique vocal traditions.
It's like a sound that's both ancient and modern at the same time.
Yeah. It's hard to describe, but it's definitely captivating.
So it sounds like the Faroe Islands is finding its voice on the global stage.
It is. And it's not just about politics or economics anymore. It's about culture, too.
And that's really exciting to see. But it wasn't all about international recognition, was it? And what was happening on the home front culturally?
Well, there were lots of art exhibitions, music performances, theatrical productions.
Sounds like a vibrant cultural scene.
It is. And one interesting trend I noticed was this focus on exploring and celebrating Faroe's identity through art.
That's cool. Like they're trying to understand and express what it means to be Faroes in the modern world.
Exactly. And that's a theme that resonates with so many cultures around the world
Right.
that search for identity in a globalized society.
It's a universal human experience.
Yeah.
So March was another eventful month for the Faroe Islands. Lots of political wrangling, economic challenges, and cultural triumphs.
It was. And through it all, we see this recurring theme of the Faroe Islands trying to find its place in a rapidly changing world.
A microcosm of what's happening on a larger scale.
Yeah.
So before we move on to April, we want to hear from you.
What stories from March resonated with you the most? What surprised you? And how does this knowledge inform your understanding of this unique nation? Moving into April, we saw a shift in focus with social and health-related issues taking center stage.
Right. It feels like a bit of a change of pace from the political and economic roller coaster of the previous months.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the big stories that really grabbed people's attention was that new healthcare agreement with Denmark.
Oh, yeah. The one we touched on earlier. Focusing on those specialized treatments and patient transfers.
Exactly. It sparked a lot of debate about the long-term sustainability of the Faroes healthcare system.
I can imagine. It's a tricky balance, isn't it?
Right.
Providing high-quality care while managing resources effectively.
It is. And this agreement really brought those challenges to the forefront for the Faroe Islands.
So what were the main points of contention?
Well, some people saw the agreement as a really positive step, ensuring that Faroe's citizens have access to the best possible care, even for those highly specialized treatments that might not be available on the islands.
Right, it makes sense. You want to make sure people get the care they need.
Exactly. But then others were worried about the costs involved.
It's like any healthcare system. There are always limited resources.
Exactly. And some people felt like this agreement could put a strain on those resources in the long run.
So it's that classic dilemma, balancing the need for quality care with the reality of financial constraints.
It is. And it's a conversation that's happening in healthcare systems all around the world.
Absolutely. Okay, so healthcare was a hot topic in April. What other health-related issues were making headlines?
Well, remember that study on smoking habits we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the one that showed those worrying trends among younger people?
Well, it was released in April, and it
Uh-huh.
really sparked a lot of discussion about the need for more effective public health campaigns.
Especially campaigns that target youth.
Exactly. It's about understanding the underlying reasons why young people start smoking and addressing those root causes.
It's not just about telling people to quit. It's about creating an environment that supports healthy choices.
Well said. Now, on a more positive note, there were some exciting developments in April when it comes to environmental health, particularly in Tórshavn.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. What were they doing in the capital?
Well, the city council unveiled some pretty ambitious plans to reduce their carbon footprint and make Tórshavn a more sustainable city.
That's great.
Yeah.
What kind of initiatives are they talking about?
Well, it's a multifaceted approach. They're talking about promoting green energy, improving public transportation, encouraging people to adopt eco-friendly practices.
It sounds like a comprehensive plan.
It does, and the public response was generally very positive.
That's encouraging. People are on board with the idea of a greener future.
They are, although there were some concerns about the costs involved and how these changes would be implemented in a practical way.
That's understandable. People want to know what it means for them in their everyday lives.
Exactly. But the fact that this conversation is happening is a positive sign. It shows that environmental sustainability is a priority for the people of Tórshavn.
It's a good sign for the future of the Faroe Islands as a whole.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, did you want to talk about any sports highlights from April?
I was just thinking about that. Was there anything particularly exciting happening in the world of Faroe sports?
While there weren't any major international victories to celebrate in April, it was a month that really highlighted local talent and community spirit.
Oh, I love those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, there was a noticeable surge in participation in grassroots sports, local teams, community events.
It's like people were coming together to support their local athletes and just enjoy being active.
Exactly. And those kinds of events are so important. They create a sense of community. They promote physical and mental well-being.
And they create those shared memories that bring people together.
It's those small moments that often have the biggest impact.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into April, it seems like the focus shifted a bit from those big political and economic issues to a more personal level.
Yeah, it was a month that really highlighted the importance of social well-being, whether we're talking about access to quality healthcare, promoting healthy habits, or building stronger communities through sports.
And it showed us that the Faroe Islands is taking steps towards a more sustainable future.
It did, and that's something to be celebrated.
Absolutely. So as we conclude our exploration of Faroe's news from February to April, we want to thank you for joining us on this journey.
It's been fascinating to delve into these stories and uncover the many layers of this unique and dynamic nation.
We encourage you to continue exploring, seek out more information, engage in conversations, and form your own opinions about the events we've discussed.
Remember, every news story is just a starting point. It's up to each of us to dig deeper and connect the dots.
Because understanding the world around us starts with curiosity and a willingness to learn.
And who knows, maybe our next deep dive will take us to your corner of the world.
Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep exploring.